In this module, we'll talk about deviance and crime. Some questions you should ask yourself are these. What is deviance? What are some examples of deviance? And how is that different from a crime? What is a crime? Who decides what is criminal, and how should criminal behavior be sanctioned? Why would I put a picture of Dr. Martin Luther King on a module concerning deviance and crime? Well, technically he is a criminal. He broke laws that he thought were unjust. And because of that, we have social change as a result. Okay? So let's talk about the description or definition of deviance. Deviance is the violation of rules or norms. Minor transgressions of these norms can be described as informal deviance. Okay? So let's think about like when someone maybe passes gas in public. That is deviance. That's minor transgressions. We will look at that person with a raised eyebrow, but it's not considered a crime. Formal deviance or crime involves violations of laws. So these are actually written in some kind of record, a book, laws and such like that. Okay? We must remember that it is not the act itself, but the reaction to the act that makes something deviant. So we, as a society, create what is deviant. We create what is crime through social constructions of these things. Okay? Deviance isn't necessarily bad. It's just different from what the group considers to be normal. Again, that is also socially constructed. When sociologists use the term deviant, they aren't making a social judgment. Deviance isn't necessarily bad. It's just different from what the group considers to be normal. When sociologists use the term deviant, they aren't. Deviance isn't necessarily bad. It's just different from what the group considers to be normal. When sociologists use the term deviant, they are making a social judgment, not a moral one. Deviance is referring to an act or behavior that is simply different from what the majority group typically does, and thus it generally receives a negative response. For example, in the United States, eating your guinea pig would be considered deviant because most people don't do that. But in Peru, many people eat guinea pigs as a part of their diet. Eating or not eating guinea pigs isn't wrong, or at least as equally wrong as eating any other animal, but depending on the culture that you're from, it can definitely be different from the group norm. Next, social cohesion. Social cohesion refers to the way people form social bonds, relate to one another, and get along on a day-to-day basis. Without seeing deviant behavior, we would have a hard time classifying what is normal. It isn't until our group norms are challenged that we come together as a group to defend these norms. Okay? For example, the tragic events following the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 challenged a norm that many people in the United States took for granted: safety. When those norms were challenged by the attacks, new policies and procedures were put in place to preserve that norm. Emil Durkheim theorized that social cohesion is established either through one of two ways: mechanical solidarity, which is based on the sameness of society's parts or members, or organic solidarity, which is based on the interdependence of specialized parts of its members. Okay, so let's think about mechanical solidarity. This is seen mostly in agrarian societies and small populations where people have to be self-sufficient and have a life that's really sustainable. They need to do everything by themselves. Whereas in organic solidarity, in our society, there's more of a population. People have specialized jobs and we're interdependent. Not everyone can be a doctor. Not everyone can be a farmer. We all have specialized occupations that provide needs and services for our society so that we can work together, have a sense of unity and cohesion. Okay, so when deviance does occur, especially when it comes to breaking a formative law, when deviance does occur, especially when it comes to breaking a formal law, there are two different types of justices that may occur. One is punitive justice and the other is rehabilitative justice. Punitive justice focuses on making the violator suffer and thus defines the boundaries of acceptable behavior. So we got to think of simply punishment. How can this person pay for what they did? Rehabilitative justice examines the specific circumstances of an individual transgressor and attempts to find ways to rehabilitate him or her. So in this case, we ask, what may cause this person to behave in this way? And we try to correct for that. Okay, so again, the first one's about punishment, having the person pay for what they've done. And rehabilitative is about how can we provide some kind of services or therapy to correct for whatever caused that person to act out. Rehabilitation has different degrees of success or failure depending on the crime committed. However, even though rehabilitation is usually less expensive than incarceration, there tends to be more sentences of incarceration than rehabilitation. Why do you think this is? Are there certain crimes that you think should receive more rehabilitation than incarceration? So again, what kinds of crimes should have punitive justice applied versus rehabilitative justice, and why? So again, what it comes down to, deviance, it's really about social control. How can we make people do what is considered normal? And if they break the norm or law, how can we correct for that? So again, this is about social control. Social control is the set of mechanisms that create normative compliance in individuals. How can we make people agree to follow the norms or to act or think in a certain way? Normative compliance is the act of abiding by society's norms or simply following the rules of group life. Okay? And we tend to do this. We don't really question a whole lot of rules and laws that we have in society because we've been socialized to follow the authority figures, to listen to our elders, and so on. We simply, for the most part, follow the status quo and don't question why these systems and norms are in place. Not all acts of deviance are going to lead to crime or breaking a law, and these are informal breaks of deviance, and the resulting will be informal social sanctions. These are unspoken rules and expectations about behavior of individuals. Again, unspoken. It's not, again, written in books, but we simply know not to do that thing, at least publicly. Okay? These informal social sanctions help maintain a base level of order and cohesion in society and form a foundation for formal social control. Okay, so this is like the base level, and then as we move up to more serious deviant acts or crime, again, that helps control society, starting with just minor informal things. We build up to more crime. Okay, so for your activity journal. For your activity journal for Deviance and Crime, there's two options. One is to look up a law that's been written out of the books, it's outdated, and just doing some research about that. Why was that law put on the books, and why was that law taken out? Okay, and again, applying theory to that. Your second option is to do a breaching experiment. With this, you have to think about a social norm. Okay. Why do people act or do certain things in society? Okay? And what I want you to do is to violate that particular social norm in some way. It has to be legal, and it has to be safe for all people involved. Okay? So again, think about that social norm. Tell me how you'll break it, and then record people's reactions to you breaking it. To make an experiment, you have to do it more than once. Okay? Again, apply theory to this. And breaching an experiment is just simply breaking social norms. Examples of formal social control include laws and authority of police officers. Okay, there's certain things that are written in the books that we know are to protect the law and to have social control. But what are some particular laws that you think are maybe too controlling or too severe, that if we had taken that law off the books, we would have more freedom and not necessarily harm oneself or others? In this case, in some states, they have legalized not only medical marijuana use, but recreational marijuana use. Why is it okay in some states, but not in others? Now we're going to apply some more theory, and this is theory particularly pertinent to deviance and crime. And one sociologist we'll talk about now is Robert Merton. Robert Merton's strain theory argues that deviance occurs when a society does not give all of its members equal ability to achieve socially acceptable goals. Okay? And key here is equal ability to achieve acceptable goals. And let's think about certain goals in our society. How about this goal of American dream, what that means? It could really mean that we have this idea that to be seen as a good person, acceptable, or seen as successful, we have to have quite a bit of money, be financially comfortable. And some people may not have the means to get to that goal. They may not have the means to afford a college degree. They may not be in an area where there's plentiful jobs. So again, there's lots of obstacles that certain people may have that may limit their ability to achieve acceptable goals. So let's talk about different types of areas. Let's talk about a typology of individuals and their patterns to achieving or not achieving certain goals. First is a conformist. They accept the goals of society and the means of achieving those goals. Conformists are those individuals who work hard in school, go to college, get a job, and save money because they want to buy a nice house, have a prestigious job, wear expensive clothes, and contribute to their retirement plans. Again, they accepted the ways, the means of achieving the typical acceptable goals of society. Next are the innovators. They accept the goals of society, but they look for new or innovative ways of achieving those goals. Innovators are people who want the same things as conformists, the same goals, a nice house, nice car, and so on, but they aren't interested in going to college and working their way up the company ladder. So instead, they find some other means of achieving those goals. Next are ritualists. They aren't interested in the goals of society, but they do not. Ritualists aren't interested in the goals of society, but they do accept the means of achieving those goals. Okay? Ritualists don't seem to think about the goal or the big picture. Instead, they live on their day-to-day, paycheck to paycheck. They go to work, have steady jobs, and so on. But they probably live in a modest rental apartment or in their parents' basement. Okay? They don't talk about their futures or their retirement. They just maintain their daily routines. Okay? So again, they're not interested in the goals. They just kind of live their day-to-day routines. Retreatists don't accept the goals of society or the means of achieving those goals. Again, they're just kind of withdrawn from society altogether. They may be living off the grid. They may be nomads and just traveling from place to place are not interested in the goals or the means of achieving those goals. Okay? And next are rebels. Rebels don't accept the goals of society or the means of achieving those goals. So they create their own goals using new means. Okay? And so they're not just retreating from society and throwing out the means of achieving those goals. They're saying we got to restructure society. The goals themselves are messed up and the means to achieving those goals are false. And so they want to start all over and create a new society with new ways of attaining goals. So let's use theory to talk about deviance. First with symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionists take a micro view of society, again, very much on the individual level. And with this theory, we are examining the beliefs and assumptions people bring to their everyday interactions to find the causes or explanations for deviance. Again, we're focusing on the interactions. Next, labeling theory. With this theory, people see how they are labeled and accept the label as being true. So this comes through our interactions with people. In our interactions, we find out who we are through how people perceive us. Okay? And so if you're given a certain label when you're growing up, such as brilliant and beautiful and athletic, those are positive labels that later you internalize and you become those things. But the opposite can also occur. In graduate school, one of my teachers told me a story about him going to work for construction companies during the summer while he's in college. And one of his co-workers, his name was JD. And my professor asked him, so why did they call you JD? Well, he said, my dad said I was going to be a juvenile delinquent, and so he called me JD. And my professor's co-worker was in and out of incarceration for the most of his life. He became this delinquent. He became a person with a record. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay? So people behave the way they think someone with their label should behave. Again, the self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're told you're going to be nothing, the result is you'll do things that are against social norms or against the goals of society. If you're told that you are great, you're smart, and all those things, more than likely you're going to work to achieve goals and be successful in achieving those goals. There are different types of deviance. The first type is primary deviance. It's the first act of rule breaking, which may result in the rule breaker being labeled as deviant and thus influencing how people think about and act towards him or her. So this is the first time you've been found out. Next is secondary deviance. These are acts of rule breaking that occur after primary deviance and as a result of a person's new deviant label. So now let's say people start treating you as deviant over time, the secondary deviance comes into effect. And so now you're starting to act out as if this label is your new identity. You just keep on doing deviant acts. Another part of symbolic interactionism is stigma. And stigma is a negative social label that changes your behavior towards a person and also changes that person's self-concept and self-identity. So let's think for a minute about people with a felony record, okay? And let's say that person wants to find a job. It's very, very difficult for people with a record to have any kind of means to be successful because this stigma, this label attaches to them. It's hard to find housing, it's hard to find a decent paying job, and so on. The stigma is there. The stigma has serious consequences in terms of opportunities made available or more likely not made available to people in a stigmatized group. Philip Zimbardo created a theory to try to explain why deviance occurs in certain environments more than others, and is called the broken window theory. He explains how social context and social cues affect the way individuals act. Okay? He states that people who wouldn't exhibit a certain behavior in one social context may do so in another context where the behavior seems more permissible. And a great show that shows this kind of stuff is What Would You Do? And in a particular clip I saw, there was this really junky beater car, and it was in a rundown neighborhood. And there was spray paint and flat tires, and this car was just like in the middle of empty parking lot. And people in this neighborhood came to vandalize the car even more. Okay, when they put the car in more, I guess, well-to-do middle-class neighborhood, this broke down beater car, people still acted very similarly. And so if you see something broken, like a broken window or beat up car, it gives people almost permission to act out in deviant ways. So let's think for a minute. What are some social institutions that influence crime and incarceration rates? So again, this is a macro level questions. And some social institutions could be the economy, education, family structure, government law, and so forth. Okay, and how these things interact together. How are they interdependent? 3 social institutions that I would like to focus on now are the economy, education, and judicial system. Okay, so my first question to you is, how does having or not having economic resources influence the probability of being incarcerated? Again, how does having or not having economic resources influence the probability of being incarcerated? Okay, so I would like to focus on Angola prison in Louisiana as one of our biggest prisons in our country and also in the world. Okay, and focusing on the economy, we see that life without parole as a sentence is so incredibly expensive to taxpayers. One life without parole offender costs taxpayers $500,000 over the course of the prisoner's lifespan. $180 million in total would be saved if sentencing statutes were revised to eliminate life without parole for non-violent offenses. So think about this. Do you think this is a just punishment for non-violent offenses? Why should a person go to prison for life? Murder, rape, those kinds of things. How about drug possession? Should that be a sentence of life without parole? Okay, next thinking question. How does access to a quality education influence incarceration? How does access to a quality education influence incarceration? Okay, still focusing on Louisiana, but this is happening more and more across the nation. We now have what we call a school to prison pipeline. Okay, these are inadequate schools that really feed into the prison industrial complex because the prison industrial complex makes a ton of money. Okay, so we see in Louisiana, they tend to have a very high school dropout rate, and however, we see it's declining. In 1990, the high school dropout rate, also push-out rate, was 12%, and it declined to 13% in. We see in Louisiana the high school dropout rate declining from 12% in 1990 to 13% in 2013. Okay, and this may look good on the surface, but in all actuality, what we see is that they're lowering the graduation requirements. We have students going to school, getting their high school diplomas, but not getting any kind of real sustainable jobs or going to college. They're simply pushing the kids through to look like their educational systems are doing well. And think about that in your own your own county in which you're from. Did your school prepare you for a college life? Did it prepare you for your job or your future career? So are schools doing what they're supposed to do? Are they quality schools? So street crime is a crime that we tend to see most often in the media, but let's think about what is really costly to us as Americans. So we don't like to focus on other types of crime, such as white-collar crime and corporate crime. Street crime refers to crime committed in public and is often associated with violence, gangs, and poverty. So that's the stuff we see all the time. White-collar crime is committed by a professional against a corporation, agency, or other businesses. Examples of white-collar crime include Bernie Madoff's fraudulent use of investors' funds. Okay, so again, this is one individual, usually in high positions, who really take advantage of their customers. Next is corporate crime, a type of white-collar crime committed by the officers or executives of a company. Corporate crimes include failure to report safety defects, workplace hazards, like the 2013 Rana Plaza building collapse in India, false claims, or illegal levels of pollution. So again, street crime is what we mostly see in mass media and what we tend to focus a lot of our attention on. White-collar crime is committed by a professional, usually an individual of a corporation, against their customers. And corporate crime is when a business is actually doing harm to their consumers. So a whole business, not just an individual. So for crime, how can we really measure crime and as a result help reduce crime? It can be difficult to measure crime rates over time for a variety of reasons. One, changes in how crimes are defined. These things change in our society for political, economic, and social reasons. So not all crimes are the same over time. Also, there's fluctuations in whether people report crimes. And if we take the case of rape, we see that there's so many rape test kits just sitting in empty or in these rooms for years and years and years. And so you go through this horrendous experience, and you have to get invasive examinations, and your DNA and other evidence is just sitting there for years, and you don't know if anything's going to happen to you. And you have to relive this traumatic experience over time. And so people are not willing always to report when these crimes happen to them. What we see now is in the case of murders, there's improvements in medical technology. So again, DNA testing and other kinds of crime scene investigations, we can actually find how and solve murder cases. Okay, we see that reporting bias may work in the opposite direction from the actual crime rate. Imagine a neighborhood where crime is common. People might be reluctant to report being pickpocketed on a subway when they just read about 3 murders the same day. And so they're focusing on not on this minor crime, it's still bad, but they know that there's more horrendous types of crimes. Okay. Conversely, in a situation where crime rates are perceived to be low, such as in the opera house, you might be more likely to report a missing wallet. So again, the environment, the social context really matters. In an area that's lots of crime, the more extreme cases are paid attention to. In areas where there's not as much crime, maybe some minor things are given a lot of attention to. So we focus a lot on crime reduction and various ways or solutions to reduce crime. And one of them is deterrence. Deterrence theory is a philosophy of criminal justice based on the notion that crime results from a rational calculation of its costs and benefits. So what this is doing is giving every individual a lot of credit, saying that they have thought for a long time and in a rational way of whether to act out in a deviant or criminal way. Okay? So according to deterrence theory, stiffer penalties, such as increased prison terms, and stricter parole guidelines should help reduce crime. So people will think, well, if I commit this crime and get caught, this is what's going to happen to me. This is the consequence of that. Again, it's giving individuals a lot of credit for having all the resources they need to choose whether to commit a crime or not. Recidivism occurs when a person who has been involved in a criminal justice system reverts to criminal behavior. So let's say a person was in, let's say, a maximum security prison for 5 years, okay, very serious, and they somehow got out. What kinds of opportunities do you think are available to them in terms of finding a place to live and work once they're out of prison? Well, it's not great for them. And so they may return back to doing criminal things just to make it in life, to find a way to get money, find a place to live, just to have their needs met. And so recidivism occurs again when a person has been involved in a criminal justice system, returns back to that criminal behavior. There's a video I have posted on D2L about Devah Page's work. She's at Harvard, a very famous sociologist, and what she did was to have an experiment where she had very similar men, their only difference was race, go out and try to find jobs. There's 4 types of men here. There's a white man with no criminal record, a white man with a criminal record, a black man without a criminal record, and a black man with a criminal record. And what she found is that even with a criminal record, white men are more likely to find work than black men without a criminal record. So watch that video clip. So here we're intersecting not only a criminal record, but race. Race has a tremendous effect on a person's ability to navigate the legal system and also other institutions such as the economy. Since the 1970s, there has been a change in the United States from a more rehabilitative sense of justice to a more punitive one. This is evidenced by historically high rates of incarceration. The consequences of mass incarceration include staggering costs, the disenfranchisement of millions of former felons, and a disproportionately high rate of imprisonment for black males, which has a ripple effect throughout the black communities and beyond. Research has shown that prison has very little effect on whether adults commit future crimes. For juveniles, time spent behind bars actually increases the likelihood of the reoffending. At various points in history, the U.S. criminal justice system has fluctuated between 2 approaches in handling criminals. Once a juvenile has a record, it's not only that that record may or may not be expunged after they turn 18, but that label of being delinquent, of being a criminal, sticks to that individual juvenile. And as a result, especially as learning more criminal behavior in juvie detention centers, they may be more likely to act this out once they're out of the system. And then very much likely they will return back as an adult into the prison industrial complex. Now I have some discussion questions for you. What is the role of prison? Is it punishment or rehabilitation? Does going to prison make offenders more likely or less likely to reoffend in the future? So